What comes to mind when I say Indian Ocean world? Ancient Roman fleets, maybe, or the medieval Tantric kingdoms of Bengal and Indonesia's Java? But there's a whole other side to the ocean that we don't often talk about: Africa, and how its goods helped Indians become rich. Indeed, at one point in the 17th and 18th centuries, it was African ivory and gold that helped Gujarati Banyas dominate the Indian Ocean world. Let's dive in. I'm Anirudh Kanisetti, historian author of Lords of the Deccan. Welcome to Thinking Medieval, where every week we tell you something new about our complex, innovative past. Always feel free to check out our recent citations below, and remember that we're all figuring out how to think about our messy, bloody, dazzling history. India-Africa exchanges, as we saw in this video, were an important dynamic in the Indian Ocean, leading to the exchange of textiles and foods, including betel, rice, and mangoes. By the 14th century, these exchanges had grown very deep. Ethiopian and Abyssinian military slaves known as Habshis could be found far in the interior of the subcontinent, even as far as Bengal, where they briefly set up a sultanate. Now, in 1392, the establishment of the Gujarat Sultanate on the other side of India heralded a new era in Afro-Eurasian commerce. Gujarati merchants, who were already major regional players that we met in this video, quickly became the dominant players in the entire Indian Ocean. According to Indian Ocean historian Michael N. Pearson in Port, Cities and Intruders, the Swahili Coast, India and Portugal in the early modern period, Jains could be found in Malindi in 1498. In 1507, Brahmin traders were there as well. They were primarily there to exchange cloth for gold and ivory. Ahmedabad's cotton and indigo industries were perhaps the greatest in the Indian Ocean at the time, dominating the trade of Arabia, Africa, and Indonesia. Meanwhile, African gold and ivory obtained at favorable rates were used by Gujarati craftspeople to make highly valuable goods for elite consumption. In Gujarat and the trade of East Africa circa 1500 to 1800, historian Edward A. Alpers traces the rise and fall of the Gujarati merchant. By 1520, Diu was one of the most important ports of the Gujarat Sultanate, home to Arab, Turk, Persian, and Egyptian diasporas. Its trade was almost completely in the hands of the Gujarati Banya merchants, though, who were encouraged by the Sultanate. Diu's importance made it a target for Portuguese predation. Despite strong resistance by Gujaratis in alliance with Egyptians and Turks, it was finally conquered in 1550. According to Alpers, this worked out very well for Diu's merchants. Guided by the rather absurd ideas of the Iberian Reconquista, the Portuguese in the 16th century sought to suppress Muslim-owned Indian Ocean shipping at all costs. This was a commercial opportunity that Gujarati Banyas were only too pleased to fill. By this time, Banyas had also developed collective institutions such as Mahajan councils at various ports, bringing together multiple caste groups to set prices on goods and coordinate relationships with rulers. And these commercial taxes were second only to Goa and the Portuguese Estado da India. Both would prove powerful bargaining chips as the Portuguese settled into the region in subsequent centuries. Now, unlike other Indian Ocean powers which focused on land, the Portuguese seaborne empire's existence depended on trade. Despite this, they frequently tried to monopolize trade for short-term profits, leading to considerable volatility and harming local industries. Through the 16th century, they tried to concentrate all East African trade in their forts at Malindi and Mozambique, decimating local textile manufacturers. But the African demand for Gujarati textiles still stayed high. And recognizing the fortunes being made by Banya traders thereafter, the Portuguese in 1595 banned Hindus from acting as agents for Portuguese officials and the state. But this policy was dead on arrival. Gujarati Banyas were simply too crucial not only in Diu but also in Malacca, which was one of Asia's greatest entrepôts and crucial to Portuguese wealth. And so Portuguese officials themselves defied the ban. The governor of Diu legally had a monopoly over African ivory, but he still found it profitable to collude with the leader of Diu's merchant Mahajans. The Portuguese state was constantly operating with European blinkers on and couldn't respond to the dynamism and commercial potential of the Indian Ocean world. The Banyas of Diu continued to flourish. There were over 30,000 of them there in 1646, according to a contemporary Portuguese letter studied by Michael Pearson in his paper Wealth and Power, Indian Groups in the Portuguese Indian Economy. Soon after, Omani Arabs began to strike back against the Portuguese in East Africa, raiding their citadels. Frightened, in 1686, the Estado da India granted the monopoly of Mozambique to Diu trade to a certain company of Mazanes, possibly Mahajans, the senior merchant collectors of Diu. For more, see Alpers, Gujarat and the Trade of East Africa. Now, surprisingly, the Company of Mazanes shared agents with the Jesuit order as recorded in Arquivo Portugues Oriental, Volume 4. That's kind of surprising, isn't it? Though Jesuits had been responsible for religious persecution in Portuguese Goa in the 16th century, by the 17th and 18th centuries, they were very friendly with Banyas, who patronized them generously in return for access to their extensive networks. This point of India's relationships with Portugal changing over time through different actors is missed by much online history discourse in our country, including, I'm sure, some of our friends in the comments. Hey. Meanwhile, other communities of Gujarati merchants also profited from Indian Ocean struggles. A Gujarati diaspora in Muscat lent ships to the Omanis to plunder Portuguese Africa in 1720, even as the Gujaratis grew more important in the region. A flamboyant merchant from the 1760s called Ponha Velgi exemplifies the complex relationship of the Portuguese and the Banyas. Portuguese historian Antonio Alberto de Andrade, in his Relações de Moçambique Sententista, records that Ponha Velgi had paid more dues on his imports than the total income of the Portuguese state in Mozambique and requested the right to ride a palanquin and wear a hat in public. The fact that he wasn't already allowed to do so is silly, especially compared to the exalted status of Gujarati merchants and bankers in the rest of South Asia, including the Mughal Empire. But apparently, Banya traders were pragmatic enough to accept a subordinate status due to the profits that it afforded, something they would continue to do in East Africa under the British Empire in subsequent centuries. Now, all this isn't exactly a feel-good story, but that was history in the early modern Indian Ocean. The India-Portuguese world was full of winners and losers, and those who were both and those who were somewhere in between. But Gujarati merchants were up to much grander adventures through the early modern globe, a topic we'll return to in future editions of Thinking Medieval. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Anabudha at Connected Histories and on Twitter at Ekanisati. We'll see you next week.